Howdy folks, and welcome back to another marvelous anime video. 39 years after its first publication, Kentaro Miura's genre-defining masterpiece, Berserk, continues to captivate the hearts and minds of audiences. With its expertly crafted world and layered characters, all brought together by Miura's penchant for great storytelling and incredible art, Berserk is the gold standard when it comes to not just work in the dark fantasy genre, but the entire medium as a whole. Central to this masterpiece is the overarching antagonist of Berserk, Griffith. At first glance, Griffith appears to be a noble and visionary leader driven by lofty ideals to establish a utopia for all of humanity. This way of thinking is further reinforced by his appearance as a man of beauty, brilliance, and unshakable ambition. However, we soon discover that beneath his ethereal charm and regal composure lies a mind shaped by ruthless idealism, emotional repression, and moral nihilism. Griffith's psychological profile isn't one of a simple high-functioning sociopath or a psycho. Instead, he represents a far more terrifying archetype, that of a man who becomes monstrous by pursuing a dream with absolute inhuman conviction. Through Griffith, we get to see how the brightest light casts the darkest shadows, as underneath that veneer of beauty and grace lies a man who is dark and ruthless. This is what makes him truly unsettling, as beneath the divine face of a savior, Griffith harbors the cruel logic of a manipulator. His controlled persona masks a fragmented, repressed psyche teetering on the edge of total collapse. The darkness in Griffith's character does not stem from madness or malevolence, but from a calculated abandonment of empathy and humanity in service of a singular goal, the creation of his own kingdom. His transformation into Femto is not merely a narrative turning point, but a psychological unraveling, which his repressed fears, desires, and vulnerabilities collapse into him, embodying the darkness within him in quite a literal sense. In today's video, we aim to explore 6 of the darkest psychological facts about Griffith that define his character the most. So, without further ado, let's dive right into the twisted psyche of one of the greatest villains in all of anime and manga, and hope that we come out the other side with our sanity still intact. Let's begin. Obsessive pursuit of his dream. The fact that Griffith's origins are shrouded in mystery only serves to highlight his obsessive ambition even further. Despite having an air of regality about him, we know that Griffith was a street urchin who never knew the identity of his true parents. He spent his childhood playing in the alleyways that were lined with brothels and taverns under the looming shadow of the castle in their city. Even back then, as a child, he knew that he was different from the rest of his companions, as he one day dreamed of having a castle and a kingdom of his own. Of course, these aren't the fantasies of a child, and by the time he was a young adult, Griffith had already become the leader of a small mercenary group called the Band of the Hawk. Despite treating them as valued comrades, we know that Griffith never viewed them as peers. The analogy used to describe their ambitions in comparison to Griffith's is that of a giant bonfire, where Griffith's ambition is the massive flame, while the Hawk's ambitions and dreams are the smaller flames that combine to keep the fire burning. By following Griffith and helping him achieve his ambitions, the Band of the Hawk hopes to achieve their individual dreams as well in the process. There's no length to which he won't go to see his ambitions fulfilled. He understood long ago that to achieve his goals, he needed people around him who would help him. To that end, the Band of the Hawk was created. Griffith then realized that having loyal followers was all well and good, but he needed funds to sustain them. To this end, he doesn't even hesitate to sell his own body to a perverse noble who loved young boys. By doing this, it secures the necessary patronage to not only sustain the fledgling Band of the Hawk, but also grow them. This goes to show that there's nothing he won't sacrifice, including his own human dignity, if it means furthering his goal. This should clearly serve as a red flag to show just how far this man was willing to go for his ambitions. Much later, after having been thrown off by Guts' sudden departure, Griffith begins to spiral out of control, which leads to him betting Princess Charlotte. We believe this was actually supposed to be the next part of his plan, but due to Guts' action, he rushed into things without his usual composure. Having succeeded in the first stage of his plan by achieving nobility, Griffith probably meant to eventually woo the princess and win the king's favor to marry her, securing himself the throne of Midland. Little did he know at that time about the king's madness and the incestuous feelings he had for his own daughter. Tortured and maimed under the king's command, he was broken, body, mind, and soul. What needs to be noted here is that Griffith is concerned about his well-being only to the extent that he is no longer fit enough to achieve his dreams. His concern is not really about the impact on his immediate health or his inability to lead the Hawks anymore. Even when grievously maimed, his despair is focused on his ambition. In fact, the despair he feels is so great that it actually is enough to trigger the Behelit in his possession. We know that one of the conditions for the activation of a Behelit is that its owner has to experience total despair. This just goes to show how much his ambition meant for Griffith. Following the activation of the Behelit, we get the commencement of the fifth eclipse. After being reminded about his goals and how much he had already sacrificed towards achieving them, Griffith comes to view his next step as just a natural progression towards all that he's ever worked for. He agrees to sacrifice the Band of the Hawk, including Casca and Guts, in order to ascend as Femto, newest member of the demonic group, the God Hand. This is the ultimate proof of Griffith's obsession with his goals, as these individuals, whom he had just betrayed, had entrusted him, not just with their loyalty, but also with their own dreams. He was the leader that they never gave up on, despite the fact that he was clearly unfit to lead them into another battle. Yet, with almost zero hesitation, he subjects them to such a horrific end, even after achieving the nigh limitless power of the God Hand and having the ability to do whatever he wishes. All of his energy and focus are turned towards reincarnating himself into the world and continuing the pursuit of the ambition he had as a mortal. Imagine having the power of a god, but you're still obsessed with becoming a king. These things highlight his obsessive nature, despite his cool and composed persona that he normally displays to the public. Charisma as manipulation. Griffith has been blessed with an extraordinary amount of charisma thanks to his beauty, astute mind, and battle prowess. He was capable of drawing people from all walks of life to follow him regardless of their age or gender. From Judo, who was a circus tumbler, to Corvus, a former bandit, everyone was taken in by his charismatic personality. While he is initially presented to us as a leader who truly cares about his men, as evidenced by his order to Casca to save Corvus from Guts during their first meeting, we learn that not all is as it seems once we peel back the layers a bit. You see, while it might be true that he did care about the Band of the Hawk, otherwise they wouldn't have been suitable candidates for the Invocation of Doom, it's also true that he never viewed any of them as his equals or peers. We know this because he explicitly states the same to Princess Charlotte during their conversation. Griffith says that for him to consider someone as a friend, that individual would need to have a dream of their own that they would be willing to fight even him for if he got in their way. As such, he didn't have any friends because no one fit the standard he had set. Let's put things into context here. The Band of the Hawk was no musician's troupe or a group of poets, they were mercenaries. This meant that they literally put their lives on the line every single time they did their job, which in essence meant that they had placed their lives in Griffith's hands for him to use as he saw fit. We're not talking about financial loans or favors, but somebody's human life. This was no army, and in their early days they were barely even a ragtag group of fighters, but they stuck with him, gave him their all. What could possibly drive someone, especially the older members, to have this much faith in a single individual? This was undoubtedly his charisma, which we can say for certain he used to manipulate these people towards achieving his goals. He justified this by saying that by achieving his goals, the Band of the Hawk would achieve their own individual dreams as well, which he categorically considered to be inferior to his. This kind of hubris that he displays while putting on the airs of a proud leader is something that cannot be ignored. Griffith crafts a myth around himself, presenting himself as a man with a dream so grand and pure that following him gives others a sense of purpose. However, what people do not see is that by elevating his own dreams above theirs, he masks his selfishness under the guise of a noble undertaking. It's not just the Band of the Hawk that he manipulates. In the beginning, we mentioned how he sleeps with a perverted noble to secure finances for his fledgling group. Well, yes, this noble was a degenerate. Griffith clearly manipulated him using his body and the man's lust for his own gain. Later, when he rescues Charlotte from Ganishka, it's not because he means to be this knight in shining armor for her. He actually wants to gain political standing and favor by having her by his side. He thrives by creating the illusion of intimacy as he appears to make people feel like they are intimately related to him. Guts has this illusion broken when he overhears Griffith's conversation with Charlotte regarding his definition of a friend. Everything is transactional in the end, from his relationship with the princess to his camaraderie with the Band of the Hawk. He plays on people's need for validation and connection, providing exactly what they need him to be, which makes them feel uniquely chosen. Along with masking his selfishness, his charisma also hides his ruthless nature. Thanks to his regal bearing and charm, people seem to overlook or ignore his cold and calculating nature completely. This is especially treacherous because the people in his life subconsciously choose to be manipulated by him as they interpret what's being demanded of them as a show of loyalty, completely ignoring the strategic detachment that Griffith actually harbored. Narcissistic Megalomaniac. Griffith displays both narcissistic and megalomaniacal tendencies throughout the series, both as a human and the demonic femto. We know that ever since Griffith was a child, he felt that he was different from the rest. As we can see, he had an inflated sense of self-importance, considering himself to be better than others from an early age. Just look at how he considers nobody to be worthy enough to be his friend or equal. This is despite the fact that those individuals have literally spent years together and have even bled for one another. For Griffith, this is clearly not enough. Their loyalty and love is never reciprocated in the same manner by him. This is because, like a true narcissist, he craves the attention and admiration of others and will go to any length to maintain it. In fact, you can quite clearly see that his image is extremely curated to make him seem ethereal and almost angelic, reinforcing the idea of his perfection in others' minds. Aided by his beautiful visage in the design of his armor, which becomes increasingly elaborate as time goes on, his entire image is a little too clean for someone whose business is war. He leans even more heavily into this after his reincarnation at Albion, where everything regarding his appearance seems to have been heightened to further evoke these sentiments in the people around him. We saw what happened the last time this illusion was broken in front of people. Griffith had a complete meltdown and initiated the fifth eclipse, essentially betraying every single human being that had ever loved or followed him. His narcissism is also very closely tied to his megalomania, as the two reinforce one another. He needs control over everyone and everything around him. When this is taken away, Griffith quickly spirals out of control. This is seen when Guts meets the Band of the Hawk for the first time. Griffith's interest is immediately piqued by the man who defies him, and instead of wanting him dead, like a true megalomaniac, he immediately wants to control this anomaly. Instead of killing the man, who killed quite a few of his precious comrades, he instead inducts him into the group, as his primary instinct is that of control. This is why when Guts decides to pursue his own dreams and leaves the Band of the Hawk after defeating Griffith, it shatters the former in various degrees. Firstly, him losing a fight totally shatters his narcissistic image of perfection that he had built about himself. His delusions of grandeur are shattered by someone he considered to be beneath him, and he is made to look human, which he interprets as frailty. This was just too great a blow to his ego, resulting in him being unable to repair his mask, leading to the events that landed him inside the Tower of Rebirth. What happened during this time wasn't just due to poor judgment, but the result of the ego of a narcissist and a megalomaniac imploding under abandonment and loss of control. If I can't wield a sword, I can't protect my dream. This is one of Griffith's earliest thoughts after getting rescued from the Tower of Rebirth by his comrades. This gives us insight into his complete breakdown after he realizes that he no longer possesses the faculty to control things around him. His immediate response to this is attempting to sexually violate Casca in order to assert his dominance and regain control. We need to bear this in mind because of what he does the moment he gains power and control after sacrificing the Hawks. He immediately goes on to rape Casca, just like he had tried to do before. This is no mere show of dominance, it's a means to seek validation of the power he had just gained and a petty act of retribution for having failed to do so in a weakened state. This is the ultimate sign of a narcissist and a megalomaniac. He's an individual who uses sex and violence, sometimes combining the two to maintain control and dominance over others. His transformation into Femto can be viewed as the literal 8-inch manifestation of his god comics. Griffith manipulates events to position himself as a messianic figure while hiding the monstrous truth from everyone. Looking at these deep flaws in his character, we can say that Griffith's so-called divine image was deeply rooted in fragile self-worth. Morally nihilistic. Moral nihilism is a viewpoint that believes there is no concept of morality. It believes that since morality is a human construct, there's no inherent truth to it except for the one attached by its creators. For someone like Griffith, who considered himself far above humans ever since before his ascension, it was only logical that he embody this belief. Griffith, for all the airs of nobility that he puts on, never once claims the moral high ground regarding his actions. While his appearance and behavior might evoke a sense of an angelic aura about him, his actions are never motivated by the desire to do good. The thing that's driven him ever since his childhood has been the singular pursuit of his dreams. He's sacrificed the lives of countless Hawks in the flames of war long before he betrayed them during the eclipse. Remember when he ordered Guts to assassinate all the nobles who were plotting against him in cahoots with the Queen of Midland? He had zero hesitation in killing those who opposed him, be they allies or enemies. He sleeps with a pedophile just so that he can secure the funds for his mercenary group and later kills the man once his purpose is served. While he does care about how others view him, he has little to no concern about his own internal moral structure, as evidenced by this decision. Since he's an individual who doesn't abide by the concept of morality, it's only natural that he feels no remorse for any of his actions. For him, it's the results that matter. Everything else is just a means to an end. Not once does he deny his atrocities, as he validates his actions by using the destiny of greatness that he feels is rightfully his. We are starkly reminded of this when he visits Rickert after his reincarnation to offer him a place in the new Band of the Hawk, considering all he had done in the past. In the eyes of Griffith, if there's anything that's sacred in this world, it's his ambition, which sanctifies every single thing that he does in its pursuit. As Femto, he's truly freed from the shackles of humanity and is free to do as he wishes. His newfound divinity is built on the denial of human ethics. As the Falcon of light, the kingdom he carves for himself is founded on betrayal, deception, and mass murder. However, none of these things affect him because after becoming Femto, he has become even more detached from humanity. The utopia that he attempts to build in Falconia is just like him, an illusion created on a mountain of corpses. Another thing that a person who embodies moral nihilism also harbors is a complete lack of accountability for their actions. If fate led him to become Femto, then everything that he does or did is justified by causality. With this mode of thinking, he absolves himself of any personal responsibility. Griffith doesn't fall from grace, he walks into the abyss quite willingly, knowing full well the consequences of his choices. His belief that morality is subjective and irrelevant makes him one of the most terrifying villains in fiction, not because he's evil in the traditional sense, but because he doesn't even believe evil is real. Psychological repression. Repression of any kind isn't exactly something that you'd immediately associate with Griffith. However, it is exactly that trait that defines him in so many ways. Griffith's greatest strength and his most fatal weakness are his total control over himself. He exhibits symptoms of emotional repression as he maintains a calm and unshakable exterior despite everything he's subjected to. This level of repression is simply uncanny in an ordinary human being. But that's the catch. Griffith is anything but ordinary. We know that he allows himself to be sexually exploited by Genin, yet he displays no disgust or revulsion towards the man. When he does kill Genin, he does so not as revenge for the things done to him, but to protect rumors from swirling about the image of the White Falcon. He's more concerned about how he's perceived and the impact that would have on his path to his dream than his own sexual exploitation. Griffith represses any feelings that an ordinary person would have if they were subjected to such exploitation, whether willingly or not. Growing up as a low-born commoner, it must have been tough for him to reach the standing he did within Midland. We know for a fact that he was constantly sneered at by the aristocracy, no matter how many heroics he pulled off. For a man with a dream as grand as Griffith's, these words must have stung, but he never lets it show. Only when these individuals conspired to take his life did he execute them with cold and calculated precision, all the while showing no hint of that in his interactions with them in public. These have all got to be deeply traumatic things to go through, even if he was able to repress it. The cost Griffith has to pay is a psychological dissociation from the very things that make him human, even before his transformation into Femto. Well, it's simple to write it off as him dismissing these events as prices he has to pay in pursuit of his dream. There's no doubt that he did pay a steep price in terms of his psychological well-being. All these bottled up and repressed emotions eventually come bursting forth when he's no longer able to continue maintaining this state of mind after his ordeal at the Tower of Rebirth. He is forced to confront all the things that he had kept repressed until then, consoling himself subconsciously that it was for a higher purpose. The resulting despair that consumes him upon realizing that the illusion he had created was shattered and all he had done so far was for naught is enough to fulfill the conditions required to activate the Crimson Behelit and start his fall from grace and his rise as the demonic Femto. Inner duality. Having just spoken about Griffith's psychological repression and dissociation, this gives us a nice transition into talking about his inner duality. When we talk about Griffith, we often talk about his fall from grace. While this statement isn't entirely false, one can argue that it wasn't a true fall from grace. This adage implies that somebody virtuous had fallen into darkness through corruption of their morals. However, Griffith already harbored a darkness within him, which was merely unleashed after he had no need to keep up the delusion that he had built around himself. Let's take a look at the work of Carl Jung, the Swiss founder of the School of Analytical Psychology. His study revolves around the interplay of the conscious and unconscious parts of our psyche that shape our personality. He refers to the unconscious part as the shadow, as it's comprised of all the parts of our personality that we reject or repress. It includes traits like jealousy, aggression, and shame, whose existence we actively try not to acknowledge. Griffith's inner duality is defined by the things he keeps repressed within himself and the public persona that he projects. His persona, that he's built as a mask, is constructed on his noble ideals, charisma, calculated detachment. He presents himself almost as a messianic figure, talking about an idealized dream and destiny while leading a brotherhood of sorts. However, this idealized persona of his comes at a cost, which is the denial and repression of his fear, doubt, need, and selfishness. Here lies the duality of Griffith, because due to this, there exists two versions of him within himself. It is this hidden personality of his that gets exposed during his moment of despair as the fifth eclipse begins. The shadow that Jung spoke of emerges. shadows, engulfing the illusory light of Griffith, finally consuming him wholly, leading him to rise as a creature of darkness. All along, this repressed side of him was envious of Guts' freedom and strength. He also coveted the love and friendship of others. Sadly, his way of thinking only allowed people to be viewed as a mere means to an end, making this an unattainable thing for him. He also subconsciously harbored a great deal of shame for all the things he had to endure in pursuit of his dreams, which placed a great deal of strain on somebody with such an inflated but fragile ego. Most of all, he felt a burning rage for being made to feel humiliated, broken, and helpless. His shadow was not born in the eclipse, it was always there. The invocation of doom and his ascension into demonhood simply made this shadow quite literal. As he rises up as a member of the God Hand, all pretense finally drops because Griffith becomes the very shadow he had once hidden. Marvelous verdict! Griffith stands as one of the most psychologically rich and complicated characters in modern fiction. This is not simply because he is evil in a simplistic sense, but because he embodies the terrifying potential of human ambition that is unfettered by morality and empathy. His villainy isn't born from a tortured past or some form of chaotic evil, but from a cold and calculated pursuit of a dream that demands the ultimate sacrifice from him. This sacrifice encompasses everything that makes him human, including love, loyalty, morality, and even his own identity. What makes Griffith truly unsettling is his inner duality. It's made up of the brilliant visionary and savior on the surface and the cruel, detached manipulator underneath. Often, Griffith's character is viewed as one that has been corrupted by ambition. But what if the truth was something else? From the points we've made today, we can also conclude that Griffith's character is not one that's been corrupted by ambition, but consumed by idealism instead. He doesn't become a monster by getting corrupted by his dream, he becomes one by pursuing it too perfectly, refusing to acknowledge the emotional and moral cost until it's too late. He doesn't allow himself to deviate from this vision, not even for love, loyalty, or self-reflection. His ideal isn't just a goal, it's his entire identity. So, when that identity is broken after he's maimed, imprisoned, and rendered powerless, Griffith doesn't simply resort to grieving. What follows is the self-annihilation of what's left of his humanity to regain control, birthing the demonic figure of Femto. Griffith's story is a cautionary tale of what happens when dreams are pursued at the cost of one's soul. However, it is these very things that make Griffith such an unforgettable character, as he reflects on the darker aspects of our own psyche that we refuse to acknowledge as well. We've all been guilty of harboring or burying our emotional pain and doubts regarding certain moral questions. We've also faced the seduction of power during our moments of helplessness, and we've witnessed human beings do terrible things with no malice, driven by pure logic. This makes him extremely relatable as well because, as human beings, we're just as complex as Griffith, and we all harbor a darkness within us that we keep at bay. To conclude, Griffith remains one of the most unsettling and complex characters in all of anime and manga to date. It's easy to admire him while being repulsed at the same time. His complexity embodies the very themes that Miura sets out to explore in Berserk, such as morality, the nature of evil, and what it truly means to be human. It forces the audience to tackle these tough questions, adding a great deal of layers to this seminal work in the dark fantasy genre. We hope that with this video, we not only managed to increase your knowledge about Griffith, but also Berserk as a whole. That said, we'd love to hear your take on what makes Griffith an intriguing villain for you personally. Also, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out the rest of our channel. We post daily videos regarding all your favorite animes and mangas, including Berserk. Thanks for sticking with us right to the end. Unfortunately, our time together has come to an end. We hope to see you soon in the next one, but until then, stay safe and stay marvelous.